Thanks very much, and thank you for staying. And I forgot to say before the film began that the whole thing has been sponsored by Stella, so it wouldn't have happened without Stella. So thanks to Stella. I've just noticed that the Stella glasses have water in them, which is a bit of a kick in the teeth. Anyway, I'd like to introduce first the producer of the film, Dimitri Doganis. And the film's director, Bart Layton. And also we have a very special guest. You last saw him staring into a big empty hole, the private investigator, Charlie Parker. Really is a wonderful film. Some questions have already come in from some of the satellite cinemas, so please do keep them coming with the hashtag The Imposter, or email to theimposterfilm@gmail.com. Watching it the second time, but it made me realise that the success of the film is based on bits of information being withheld throughout for the various twists that come later on in the film. And I wondered actually whether you had to have the interviewees to be in some way complicit in that. Did you have to say to them, look, don't give stuff away, you know, this is going to be a film with twists and turns?
No, not really. But certainly one of the things that became very apparent in the making of the documentary portion of the film was that we would go from, one interview one day with and you'd come away with a very clear idea of what we thought had happened, you know, and you'd feel, okay, I kind of get it now. And then the next day we would go to and do an interview with the FBI or with Charlie or someone and come away equally convinced of the completely opposite conclusion. So really part of what you're talking about with the structure of the film was really about finding a way to reflect for the audience some of the experience that we had been on in this slightly twisting and turning detective story that we found ourselves in. So there was a bit of that, and I think, you know, in terms of the way in which they talk, sometimes, you know, some of the contributors talk in the present tense, you know, when she arrives in Spain, and she's, you know, all of these things which are kind of firing from her memory very readily, and she's talking, she's like, well, you know, who am I waiting for? Oh, wow, you can smoke here, and all of these things. And those weren't things that, you know, I hadn't asked her to speak in the present tense, but certainly, you know, part of the challenge, I think, with those kinds of interviews is, you know, allowing people to speak from a place which is sort of unencumbered by everything that would follow. So you know, when they talked about him as Nicholas, even though they knew later he wasn't going to be Nick, you know, he was someone else, they were very much just speaking about what they knew of the world at that point, at that very specific point in the story that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm. And Frederick seemed difficult person to deal with. There didn't seem to be a huge amount of... Again, watching it the second time, you realise that he just didn't really care about the feelings of the family that he tricked and so on. There seemed to be very little empathy going on. Did you find him a difficult person to be with?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing about dealing with Frederick is that it's not just a straightforward... You don't have one response to him. You kind of have several. And I think I realised, you know, when I first met with him, that he certainly invites sympathy, you know, and he feels, you know, you feel like you need to look after him. I remember the first day we brought him to London, I had this very strong sense, you know, that we need to take him, put him back on his train, back on the Eurostar, as you would with a kid, but obviously he's a year or two older than me, and at that point you start to realise that he is doing to you what he does to everyone, and that is part of, you know, the manipulation. So I felt there were certainly times where I sympathised with him, and I felt like I was beginning to understand what is really a rather twisted logic, which is, you know, I had my childhood stolen from me, so wasn't I in some ways justified in stealing one back? Or, you know, they were a family without a kid, and I was a kid without a family. And of course, you start to buy into that, and at that point in time, I realised, you know, he absolutely needs to look you, the audience, in the eye. You need to be in some ways on the receiving end of the con man in order to really understand kind of how he does what he does.
Can I ask, can people, it's hard to tell from here whether people can hear this okay or not. Is the sound okay? I kind of had okay. If it can be made any louder, that would be good. Yeah, that suddenly feels a bit louder. And I think we can live with this screeching feedback for it to be a bit louder. So Charlie, have you found him yet?
No, I haven't, but I went to the phone booth where he was last seen, and I got inside the phone booth and tried to get inside his head, the young kid. And when I go to a crime scene, I say the same 4 words, every sparrow that falls, because I believe the Creator sees that. Someone saw that day. So I made the walk to his house.
When the phone booth, you're talking about the phone booth in San Antonio?
Where he made the telephone call from the phone booth. And I followed the trail that the real Nicholas Bart Layton made. And I know he made it home. In our country, we can background check people that live in an area. And I background checked all the people that lived up above where he walked in the wooded area, all the people on the streets. There were no sexual predators. There were no violent people. There were some people with criminal records, but none that kidnapped or did anything violent. I feel like he made it home that day. And if he made it home, he was never again seen by the neighbors. He was never again seen by anyone else. So that's my feelings on it. I know that he made it home.
And there hasn't been any movement since how the film ended?
No.
I mean, do you have any suspicions?
No, but I believe there will. I believe there will.
Because of the film?
Because of the film. I believe someone heard something, someone will come forward. It's a private detective's dream to make a movie about a case he's working. And someone will come forward, believe me.
You come over great in the film, so I can imagine that you probably really like it. The first question from a member of the audience is from Rowan in Cardiff. He said how the family reacted to the film, and maybe I can add to that, how has Frederick the Imposter reacted to the film?
Sure.
And Dimitri, if you want to answer that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the family, we thought it was very important that the family should see the film before anyone else did, and Bart and my co-producer Poppy took the finished cut of the film, almost finished cut of the film, to show them in Texas before it was seen at Sundance. Bart's probably better placed to talk to their reaction, but I think they broadly thought it was fair.
Yeah, that's what I think, you know, they'd been involved with a couple of media things before, long article in the New Yorker, a couple of magazine, TV shows, which they felt hadn't gone well for them. So I think they were circumspect about doing something else, but at the same time wanted the chance to tell their side of the story, which they felt had never been told. So when they saw it, they sort of said, well, Beverly said she felt it was honest, and Kerry said she thought it was fair, a fair account of what they'd experienced.
I mean, you've been very good at, pulling the rug from under us. 1 minute we think the family did it, 1 minute we think not. I mean, her response at the end, that it's crazy, we're the only people looking for him for 4 years. Why would, it's a very compelling defence. But in general, what's the view? What do the people who know about the case, the New Yorker article and so on, what's the kind of prevailing view? Is it that the family know what happened to the kid and are covering it up?
Depends who you ask.
Yeah, I think you can ask different people. You ask Charlie or you ask...
In fairness to the family, I found a call to the grandmother from Bourdain for 94 minutes, one phone call, where he pumped the grandmother for information about the dog and cat that they owned when they were little, about neighbors, funny things he might have said. He was so professional in the ruse that he did things like that. And another thing, in fairness to him, the real Nicholas Bart Layton was a changeling. He was like, 1 minute you look at him in a photo and he's like a little gangbanger. We call them gangbangers. The other, he's like a sweet, innocent boy. So what 12 to 13 to 14, even up to 16-year-old kid isn't a changeling? And they come back home after that many years. The parents look at them strange every morning, let alone when they've been gone a long time. So that, in fairness to them, there was that sort of thing going on. He has an evil presence about him. Maybe you didn't see it, I see it.
Nicholas?
No, the
Frederick
Bourdin has that.
Gosh.
And he's that slick to be able to call the grandmother, to ask everyone he saw, people in the neighborhood, what was I like as a child, you know, and he got that kind of information.
But John, to go back to your question about what's the prevailing view of it, I mean, certainly in terms of inside the production team, I think we went on this crazy journey and had endless debates about it and would argue and take different sides and swap sides and come around. I think what we realised pretty quickly was that we weren't going to be able to answer the question of what happened to this missing child, although it's a film with a missing child at its heart. That's perhaps not what the film ends up being about. And I think that's kind of important and significant in how Bart executed it.
And that's my quest. That's not their quest. You know, I'm the guy trying to find out where the kid is, and they of course want to know.
I think for me, one of the things that, you know, it became about, neither about him, although I'm sure he'd like to think that the film really is about him. It became about not, you know, if as a documentary maker, part of your job is to kind of pursue this idea of an objective truth, which I think is a whole other debate. But, you know, what was clear is that there wasn't going to be this neat answer. There was going to be 4 or 5 kind of conflicting versions of the truth. And that, in a sense, became what the film was about to me. You know, and of course, finding a way for you, the audience, to go on, not, you know, because I think it'd be easy to make a film like this where you're kind of looking down a microscope at a group of individuals that you can't relate to on any level. You don't understand how a family could fail to recognize their own flesh and blood. You don't understand how this individual could want to steal someone else's identity, you know. But yeah, I don't think that is the experience you have. I think you do watch this, and I think you go on everyone's journey with them simultaneously. And I think that felt like the right way to try and tell the story.
Your opening question, which is about this notion of withholding information, actually, I think what happens in the film is, it's not that information is withheld, but the audience learns the bits of information as the people in the film learn it. So it's less kind of controlled than I suppose the question suggests. Actually what happens is, as we go through the film, as the audience goes through the film, we learn with them. And I think not only does that make it feel kind of faithful to the events, but I also think it makes it feel less like a documentary and more like what the Americans call narrative, you know, make it feel more like a kind of a feature film, because that's how feature films work as well. But it's also, in this instance, a really great way of answering this central challenge, which is how do you make a documentary, as Bart says, normally involved in searching for an objective truth, when you've got these very unreliable witnesses, or certainly one very unreliable witness at the heart of the film.
And in fact, quite a few of the questions that have come in have been about Frederick, about whether you felt deceived by him. That was from Reese, and whether you felt that he was trying to pull the wool over your eyes. That was from Marge.
I think that speaks to what we were talking about before, which is, you know, yes is the answer on one level, but I also feel like, you know, the audience are as well placed to make up their minds about that as we are.
Although the last line that you give Frederick is very damning. I mean, it's the kind of thing that psychopaths would say, that I feel absolutely no empathy whatsoever for anybody but myself. I only care about myself. And I was actually thinking, in a film where there's no truth, there's no factual truth, that seemed like a moment of real clarity.
Yeah, and I think, interestingly, like, we know from the first thing he tells us that, you know, he's kind of almost telling, you know, I'm a liar and this is how I do it. And I think, so we know what we're dealing with right at the beginning, yet we are still willing to go on this journey with him. We're still willing to allow him to take us and to kind of root for him at times, I think, even though you sort of know what you're dealing with. And of course, at the end, it felt important to kind of, in case you were under any, you know, uncertainty, to remind you of the person who you've been relying on to tell you a lot of this story and to make some, you know, heavy allegations and all sorts of things. So I think, you know, what I would say is the reason he looks down the lens, the reason, you know, that he's large in frame, all of those things are consciously in an effort to allow you as an audience to have a level of interaction with him. You know, because the alternative is you make a film and you decide right at the beginning, this guy is inexcusable, despicable, unforgivable. And so what do? You kind of make a thesis film where all you do is insert kind of, extracts from interviews which reinforce that. And that didn't feel like what the experience was like to me. I felt like I sat down with everyone and I kind of believed everyone.
After the FBI swarmed the building and took Bourdain, arrested him, I went back into where he lived. And I asked Beverly if I could go through his things, if I could see where he slept, go into his closet. I picked up his pack, and there was nothing in it but 2 Michael Jackson tapes, and that's it. He had 2 pair of jeans and 2 shirts. He had been there for months. It was a no gain for him. So what was his real motive for being there? Was it just to pull the ruse, to do the job? I saw no gain at all. He never got a job. He never looked for a job. He never accomplished anything but hurt that family.
Like he was enjoying just playing the game. Like the
to be.
game was the reason
It
for him
has to
doing
be.
it. Yeah, that's kind of how it seemed. And people like that can be quite dangerous. Have you felt in any way threatened by him? Has he seen the film?
He's, up to this point, he's refused to see the film, but that hasn't stopped him from attacking it, and me rather viciously.
And reviewing the film, actually.
Yeah.
Reviewing it where?
He's reviewed it on YouTube.
Yeah, you can see it on YouTube. He is about 6 minute long, and then
And it's not nice. What does he say?
No, actually, it's kind of
The review is fair. I mean, to remind you, he hasn't seen the film, but he has. As you know, as you could probably guess, that would be no impediment to reviewing.
Yeah, he doesn't admit to having not seen the film until about 3/4 of the way through this review.
And he's viciously attacked you, you said?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I don't know, I think if you're him, maybe the idea that you're not in control of your story is problematic. And I think he sees all of these things being written about him, and I think he sees that people are reviewing it and people are talking about him and it, and some people describe him as a psychopath, and some people describe him as, that poor kid, I wish I could have looked after him. And, so in answer to your other question, it's wildly polarized views of that. And I think I think he finds it incredibly difficult having all of this stuff written and not being able to actually control it. And also, if you're him, you don't want your story set in stone. You want it endlessly malleable. Yeah.
Are you going to try and do something to diffuse the angry feelings? Or are you just going to sort of keep quiet and hope they diffuse themselves?
Well, we differ on this. I feel he's been so unpleasant he can pay his money and go and see it now, but that,
Yeah, I take a slightly different view. But you're probably the expert. What should we do? I mean, this is your
we
field,
should
isn't
get
it?
some
But the
insight.
thing is, I mean, the fact that I've written a book about psychopaths should in no way qualify me to judge somebody on the basis of seeing a documentary. So I'm going to opt out of that. Okay, Charlie, it's a question from the lovely Cameo Cinema in Edinburgh from Helene Kist. Did you find anything in the garden, and are you still looking? And I noticed there was some dispute as to which part of the garden you should dig in. Are you thinking about digging in the other part of the garden?
I wanted to dig in I want to dig in 2 other places, and I have 2 other spots I would like to look at.
Darryl seemed very amenable to you digging up his garden, so why don't you just go back and dig up the other bits?
Well, in our city, it's not so easy to dig in a guy's backyard. If you find a body in a person's backyard, they have to declare that before they sell it. It knocks down the price of the house about half the price. And so people say, wait a minute, you're not looking for a body in my yard. But our garden.
Daryl's actually a policeman.
Yeah, he was a policeman.
Right.
And he is a good man and let us dig, yeah.
Right. Okay, a couple of broader questions. Jennifer at the Gate in Notting Hill, what were your reasons for making The Imposter as a documentary? How did you find it, and why did you feel compelled to make it?
I initially found it I found a story about him, not actually about this particular series of events, in a Spanish magazine, and it talked about his background, having, because he was, even at the time that this story happened, he was already known in France as the chameleon. So he'd already had this history of kind of going throughout Europe, pretending to be an orphan. And that was intriguing enough to want to find out more. And then I did some research and found, much more detail about this situation in which he had successfully stolen the identity of a real child. And so there were two real questions. The first one being, what kind of a human being would go through with something like that? And then the second part being, what kind of a family might be capable of falling victim to it? And so that was the starting point, and then managed to make contact with him through his YouTube page, which he continues to broadcast vitriol on. And
all this nastiness, has it in any way made you regret making the film, or are you still kind of happy with it?
No. I think you with the film, I think you get a really good sense of what this person is like, and I think that was one of the things that felt important, that to try and reflect the experience of dealing with him, that not only I had, but a lot of the people who would have come into contact with him, the Spanish authorities, the FBI, all of these things. Charlie, that we could in some way allow the audience to have a degree of experience of that. And I think the simple fact is that it's, you could wait your entire life as a filmmaker for a story which is, to use that cliche, that much stranger than fiction.
No one ever punished Bourdain. All the years he did those things, what you saw at the end. When he was sentenced in San Antonio, Texas, I was there. I had to testify at the trial. His shoulders shook uncontrollably. He wept. He had to be almost carried out. They were holding me. He never dreamed that he would get a sentence, because people took something like what he did lightly. They took it lightly, and you can, 30 days in jail, or we'll let you go. Who knows what the other people thought? But the judge that he got, he made a mistake with that judge. And 6 years federal time is 6 years federal time. He had difficulty in prison. He was afraid of the other prisoners. They had to sentence him to what's called administrative segregation to protect him. So he had no idea that was going to happen to him. I think he had been able to get out of it, like a child being scolded, but it didn't happen that way.
But still, after going to jail for 6 years, he did it again a couple of months later.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, I don't really know what that was about. I kind of feel like part of that was about kind of getting arrested, because he didn't really, at that point he would have been nearly 30, and I kind of think the reason he went and did that, and that case, Leo Ballet, was a really high profile kind of missing children's case, so there's no way that he would have been anything other than him getting arrested and being again put in the media would have happened. So I think part of that was that he's kind of had become institutionalized, felt that he didn't know how to look after himself as an adult, and wanted to, and the knowing that he probably was too old to get into a children's centre, maybe prison was about the next safest place. I don't know.
Can I ask, all these questions have come from other cinemas. Is there anybody here who'd like to ask questions? The gentleman up there in the blue shirt.
What's he like with his own family? He said he's got kids and a wife.
Yeah.
So what is he actually like with them? Presumably, he doesn't lie to them on a regular basis, so he has to admit that he's a father.
The question's about
make
Frederick's
breakfast
own,
or something like that.
yeah, Frederick's own family. What's he like as a father?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to give chapter and verse on it, but certainly he seems like a very attentive father, and his kids came to the office one day and they seem like a normal family. Sweet normal. I mean, genuinely, there was nothing remarkable about it, and he seemed, like I say, attentive and a loving father.
Charlie?
I'm surprised that he's working in security. That's what he's doing.
He's a security guard.
Yeah.
He was working in telephone sales for a while, which I felt quite
But
appropriate.
he's now in security.
If somebody was more trigger happy than me in diagnosing people as a psychopath, I would be having a field day right now. But I don't feel as if I can do it.
You're showing incredible restraint.
Well, I mean, Robert Hare, who's like the king of psychopathy studies, says an awful lot of them go on to become security guards or concierges,
How
like
many
masters
of them
of.
have what seems to be a normal lower middle class family with,
That's unusual because many short-term marital relationships and kind of cheating on your wife. I mean, that's the kind of thing that high-scoring psychopaths do. So having a completely happy domestic life. And I think probably also crying when you're sentenced, that's all unusual. Those are all things that... and blushing when you fancy Amy from these are all things that aren't psychopathic.
Yeah, most bad guys stand tall when they're sentenced. They don't say a word.
There was a Telegraph journalist who went down to meet with him recently and talked about how lovely and normal his family was, and said that he was training dogs. And I mean, I've seen a photograph of it. His family, his kids look absolutely fantastic. His wife looks lovely. So.
But I also think that we're kind of joking around the kind of psychopathy, but what he clearly has is an ability, which I think is like empathy, which is an ability to understand what people's motivations are. And he is kind of a master manipulator of people, and he is a very unusual and, in a way, incredibly highly skilled individual in this, in that there are very, very few people who could pull off this kind of thing, even with whatever you make of that family, who could fool all the authorities that he did and everything else. And he's kind of got this perfect pitch for human emotion. You know how sometimes there are people who never had a lesson in their life, but you can hum a tune and they'll play it on the piano. He's kind of got that for people. He understands what they need and understands how to play them. And it is, I don't know what a psychologist would call that, or whether that's diagnosable, but it is striking and unusual.
Yeah.
Do they use the word in England, chumming?
Chumming, no.
As though you chum for fish? You throw out bait for fish?
Right, no.
That's a term we use. I believe he'll do it again. I believe he'll play an older person. But I think, in essence, the media, we're chumming right now. We're baiting him.
It'd be harder with this in the cinemas.
I think he'll show his skill again and try.
Yeah. Any other questions from the person there in the top? If you like, I'll just repeat it if you don't want to wait for the mic.
He's clearly very messed up. And I wonder if you found out anything, or obviously you were interested, but did you find out anything that might have happened to him for the reason why he is like that?
Yes, it's an interesting question. And funny, Nancy Fisher, as she's, the FBI agent, said, either he had been experience of had experience of some of these things, or he was a phenomenal liar. I think the answer is that, partly it depends on who you believe. Certainly there was no evidence, there was no documentation that we found that said that he had been the victim of abuse, or that there was ever any kind of police involvement. He had been in all of these, that montage that you see of all of those different identities and places, that isn't a graphic sequence that we've created, those are the Interpol files. So we know that he had been in all of those places. And, one of the weird things was that a lot of the things that he said, which I expected not to be true, so for example, that the Missing Children Centre had sent him the fax to the orphanage, and we were like, come off it. And we rang them and said, is this something that you would have done? And they said, absolutely not, never. We would never send out a missing children's flyer. And we're like, well, then how did he get the identity? And 2 weeks later, they rang back from Washington and said, yeah, actually, we've looked at the documentation. We did fax that. So there were a lot of things that he said that did appear to be accurate. I mean, and he did tell me when I first sat down with him, I didn't know what film I was going to make. So I sat down and we started the story at the beginning, at his birth, and he told a very long story of which he was the victim, essentially. But then I kind of felt like actually he was probably a way into a different story, which you see here, which I think asks bigger questions than just him, the imposter. It's as much about self-deception as it is about deception, really. And so that's why I kind of decided not to put his whole backstory and front load at the beginning. Would have changed everything. It felt important that we knew only as much as Charlie Parker knew, or Nancy Fisher, that that there was a sort of logic, as Dimitri talked about, there was a logic to what we discover as we go. So in a sense, I kind of felt like a lot of the stuff which was outside of the confines of this particular story were sort of not what the story was about in a weird way, and it should be about what you choose to believe of what he tells you. I hope that answers.
And so there are references in the film to kind of his childhood, but they are accounts which he gives. You know, and we did do some work trying to, we looked for evidence of, as Bart says, abuse or arrest records of members of his family or other things. There isn't the kind of documentary evidence that you would want to be able to make particular allegations against people. But do you believe him? I mean, he claims he was a victim of abuse, and clearly he had a very troubled upbringing. I mean, that's clear. He was in care from a pretty young age.
Prison testing, and it's fairly sophisticated, showed him to be a sociopath. He was there long enough to be tested over and over. And he read books about sociopaths and psychopaths. And an interesting thing, after the betrayal was over, after he had told me he was Frederick Bourdin, he became a different person. He was completely different. He to me, perhaps it was because I was scared, but he became a completely different person. It was as though his accent wasn't as much, and it was as though he had changed. And I will never forget that. The look, the way he talked, it was different.
There was one thing that we couldn't put in the film, which Charlie can speak about, for a number of reasons, but it happened after he was arrested. And he claimed that he had known Nicholas. And Charlie was involved with a news program which did a polygraph on him on ABC News, which he passed. He
passed the polygraph. And we believe in the polygraph. In the United States, every cop you ever talk to believes in a polygraph.
Even though there is no evidence that the polygraph works.
There's no evidence, but it's hooked up to the sweat glands, it's hooked up to the blood pressure, it's hooked up to all parts of the body. And in our country, it's used. I spent my last $400 to give him a polygraph, and he passed it. I thought sure he would flunk it, and he would be exposed.
I know we have to wrap up. I'm really sad to say, because this could have gone on for ages. But can I just ask, has anybody ever asked him if he considers himself to be a psychopath or a sociopath or whatever word you want it?
No,
but it's the kind of thing that when he sees written, he gets really, really angry about.
He hates the word monster.
But John, just while we've got you, it feels like, you know, you've done a brilliant job of asking a question, but you've done quite a lot of research in this area. What's your...
Well, as I say, I feel like it's not my place on the basis of seeing a film to sort of say, yes, I think he's, you know, a classic psychopath. I feel it's not my place really to make that pronouncement.
It's interesting that what we're talking about is what do you make of him? You know, how do we judge him?
Well, the one thing I would say, and I think we do really need to wrap up, is that what you just said about, you know, knowing the tune, knowing the song, but not knowing how to kind of feel the emotions. So you ape other people's emotions, and I mean that's what they do. But as I say, you know, I mean, I've never met the guy, so. I don't feel as if I should make any pronouncements. Well, look, I'm really sorry that we've had to end after just half an hour, but I thank you very much for coming, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming. Thank you very much.